As the evening settles and the world grows quieter, I invite you to rest here with me for tonight's story. Let the day soften its grip. Let the thoughts that carried you through the hours gently loosen and drift away. We are stepping into history together, not with urgency or noise, but with calm attention and care. Tonight, we turn our focus toward an ancient land shaped by dust and stone, olive trees and narrow streets, prayer whispered at dawn and lamps glowing at night. We will be exploring the long and difficult chapter known as the Roman expulsion of the Jews. It is a story that unfolds slowly across decades, even generations, and one that deserves to be told with patience and quiet respect. As background historian, I will guide you through this past as though we are walking together beneath a fading sky. We will not rush. We will pause where the road narrows. We will listen closely to the echoes that remain in broken walls, in scattered communities, and in the memories that history itself struggles to hold. In the centuries before Rome tightened its grip, Jewish life in Judea followed rhythms both ordinary and sacred. Days were shaped by work and rest, by family meals, by learning and prayer. Seasons turned gently, marked by festivals and pilgrimages, by harvests and hopes. Even under foreign rule, there was a sense of continuity, a thread connecting generations to land, law, and tradition. But Rome was an empire that valued order, control, and unquestioned authority. What began as oversight slowly hardened into dominance. Taxes increased. Soldiers lingered in streets and marketplaces. Governors came and went, some indifferent, others cruel. Tensions grew quietly at first, like heat gathering beneath the surface of the earth. Over time, unrest became impossible to ignore. Resistance met repression. Faith collided with imperial power. What followed were conflicts that reshaped not only cities and temples, but entire lives. Homes were left behind. Sacred spaces were destroyed. Communities that had existed for centuries were scattered across unfamiliar lands. Tonight's series will move gently through these moments. We will explore the political forces of Rome, the spiritual endurance of the Jewish people, and the human experience that existed between them. Not only the battles and decrees, but the quieter consequences. The long walks into exile. The rebuilding of life far from home. The way identity survives even when place is lost. This is not a story meant to overwhelm you. It is one meant to be understood slowly, in the way firelight reveals a room little by little. Each part of this series will carry us further along the path, always at an unhurried pace, always returning to stillness. So take a comfortable breath. Let your shoulders ease. In the hush of the evening, we will begin to drift back through time, toward stone roads and lantern glow, toward voices that once filled courtyards and synagogues. Part 1. As we begin Part 1, let us move slowly, as though our footsteps are echoing softly on stone. The air is warm, touched by dust and sun, and the land before us is ancient even by ancient standards. I am standing in Judea, in the 1st century of the Common Era, and I invite you to stand here with me, quietly, without urgency. Judea at this time is a land layered with memory. Every hill seems to carry a story. Every road has been walked by generations before. Villages are clustered close to water and fields, their homes built of pale stone that holds the day's warmth long after sunset. Life here moves according to familiar rhythms. Morning prayers rise with the light. Work fills the hours between. Evenings gather families together beneath oil lamps and open skies. Yet beneath this steady routine, there is tension. It is not always spoken aloud, but it is felt. Judea is no longer truly free. Rome rules this land, and Rome's presence is everywhere. In the soldiers stationed at crossroads. In the banners that hang from public buildings. In the taxes collected with meticulous care. Roman rule did not arrive all at once. Decades earlier, Roman generals had intervened in local power struggles, presenting themselves as stabilizers, as allies. Over time, those alliances hardened into control. Kings became client rulers. Governors were appointed from afar. Decisions that once belonged to the people of the land were now made in distant halls. For many Jewish communities, this created a deep and lasting strain. Jewish law, tradition, and identity were inseparable from daily life. Faith was not confined to temples or scrolls. It shaped meals, rest days, family roles, and moral choices. Roman governance, by contrast, was pragmatic, hierarchical, and indifferent to local spiritual meaning. These two ways of seeing the world were never comfortable companions. Still, most people tried to endure. Farmers tended their fields. Craftsmen shaped wood and clay. Scholars debated scripture in shaded courtyards. Parents taught their children the stories of their ancestors, reminding them who they were and where they came from. Hope did not vanish, but it became quieter, more guarded. Jerusalem stood at the heart of this world. The city was crowded, vibrant, and deeply sacred. At its center rose the Second Temple, a place of pilgrimage and prayer, its white stone and gold accents catching the light from miles away. For Jewish life, the temple was more than a building. It was a symbol of covenant, continuity, and divine presence. To Rome, Jerusalem was something else entirely. It was a restless city in a restless province. It required constant supervision. Roman officials watched it closely, especially during festivals when pilgrims filled the streets and emotions ran high. Soldiers were stationed nearby, always ready, their armor a sharp contrast to the flowing robes of worshippers. This constant watchfulness bred resentment. To be observed is to feel mistrusted. To be controlled is to feel diminished. Over time, resentment settled into anger, and anger into resistance, though not all resistance looked the same. Some resisted quietly, by clinging more tightly to tradition. Others withdrew, forming isolated communities devoted to purity and study. Still others believed that open defiance was the only path forward. These differences did not always unite people. Sometimes they divided them. Rome, for its part, had little patience for unrest. The empire valued stability above all else. Rebellion, even the hint of it, was met with force. Governors were judged by their ability to keep order, not by their understanding of local cultures. When tensions flared, violence often followed. I imagine a family living just outside Jerusalem. A father who remembers stories of greater independence, passed down by his own father. A mother who worries each time Roman patrols pass too close to their home. Children who sense unease without fully understanding it, absorbing it like dust in the air. These are the people most affected by what comes next. Not generals or emperors, but ordinary lives shaped by decisions far beyond their reach. As the years move forward, Roman authority becomes heavier. Taxes increase. Religious autonomy shrinks. Occasional uprisings are crushed swiftly and publicly, meant to discourage others. Each punishment leaves a mark, not just on bodies or buildings, but on collective memory. Still, faith endures. Prayers continue. Scriptures are copied and studied. The idea that identity can survive even under domination becomes a quiet act of resistance. To remember who you are is, in its own way, to refuse erasure. As we reach the close of Part 1, the world around us feels calm on the surface, but charged beneath. Nothing has yet shattered, but the ground is trembling. Rome stands confident in its power. Judea stands resolute in its faith. Between them, a collision is slowly forming, shaped by fear, pride, devotion, and misunderstanding. In the stillness that follows, let us pause here together. The lamps are being lit. Night settles over the hills. In the next part, we will drift closer to the moments when tension gives way to open conflict, and when history begins to turn in ways no one can fully stop. Part 2. Let us drift gently onward into Part 2, as night deepens and the air cools. The lamps of Judea glow softly now, casting small circles of light against stone walls. I remain here as background historian, walking beside you through a time when patience is thinning and quiet endurance is becoming harder to sustain. In the years following Rome's firm establishment of control, the weight of occupation grows more noticeable in everyday life. What once felt distant now presses close. Roman taxes are no longer an occasional burden but a constant presence, calculated carefully and collected without sentiment. Coins change hands more often than comfort allows. For many families, each payment means less grain stored for winter, fewer animals kept, fewer small comforts that once softened daily labor. Tax collectors are not always Roman by birth. Some are local, working on behalf of the empire, and this makes their presence even more painful. To see a neighbor enforcing imperial demands fractures trust within communities. Conversations become cautious. Loyalty is quietly questioned. The fabric of shared life begins to thin. Roman law, too, seeps into places it once did not reach. Disputes that would have been settled by religious courts are sometimes redirected to Roman authority. Punishments are public, deliberate, and meant to instruct through fear. Crucifixions appear along roadsides, stark reminders of what happens when Rome's patience ends. Even those who look away cannot forget what they have seen. Jerusalem feels these pressures most intensely. The city swells during festivals, drawing pilgrims from across Judea and far beyond. Songs fill the streets. Incense rises. Yet above the prayers and music, Roman watchtowers remain still and alert. Soldiers line the edges of crowds, hands never far from their weapons. Celebration and suspicion exist side by side. Within Jewish society, debate grows sharper. Scholars and teachers argue over how best to respond to Rome's dominance. Some urge accommodation. They believe survival lies in careful compromise, in preserving religious life even if political freedom must wait. Others insist that submission erodes the soul. To them, faith demands resistance, not later, but now. These disagreements are not abstract. They shape daily choices. Do you pay taxes without protest, or quietly resent each coin given? Do you avoid Roman officials entirely, or engage with them when necessary? Do you teach your children to wait patiently for change, or to prepare for struggle? Different groups emerge, each responding to the same pressure in their own way. Some retreat into study and ritual, seeking purity and meaning apart from the wider world. Others move into the wilderness, forming communities built around strict discipline and shared belief. And some begin to speak openly of revolt, convinced that Rome can only be challenged through force. Rome observes all of this with unease. The empire is accustomed to governing diverse peoples, but Judea resists in ways that feel unpredictable. Religious devotion here is not easily separated from political identity. The idea of divine law standing above imperial decree troubles Roman officials, even when no weapons are raised. Governors rotate in and out of Judea, each bringing their own temperament. Some are cautious, others harsh. A careless insult, a misjudged decision, or an act of desecration can ignite outrage. Small incidents carry enormous weight in a land already stretched thin. I imagine a marketplace at midday. Vendors call out their goods. Children weave through crowds. A Roman soldier pauses near a stall, his presence enough to quiet nearby conversations. Eyes lower. Voices soften. Life continues, but never freely. Rumors spread easily in such an atmosphere. Stories of past victories and ancient promises circulate alongside tales of Roman brutality. Hope and fear mingle, indistinguishable at times. The future feels uncertain, balanced delicately between endurance and eruption. Outside the cities, the countryside holds its own quiet tension. Farmers work land that has fed their families for generations, unsure how long they will be allowed to keep it. Roads once traveled by pilgrims and traders now also carry troops and supplies. The land itself seems to hold its breath. Rome increases its military presence. Fortresses are strengthened. Patrols become more frequent. Each measure is meant to ensure order, but instead it deepens the sense of occupation. Control becomes visible everywhere, and visibility breeds resentment. Yet through all of this, Jewish life continues. Sabbaths are observed. Festivals are kept. Stories are told and retold, not only as remembrance but as reassurance. To remember survival is to believe in it again. There is a quiet courage in this persistence. Even as external pressure mounts, identity remains intact. Traditions adapt where they must, but they do not disappear. Faith becomes portable, able to travel in memory and practice even when place feels uncertain. As Part 2 draws to a close, the atmosphere grows heavier, though still outwardly calm. Rome believes it is tightening its grip, securing a difficult province. Judea feels increasingly constrained, increasingly watched, increasingly unheard. Nothing has yet broken open, but the space for peaceful endurance is narrowing. The distance between patience and defiance grows shorter with each passing year. Let us pause here, beneath a darkened sky scattered with stars. The roads are quieter now. Fires burn low. In the next part, we will move closer to the sparks that turn tension into open rebellion, and watch as restraint begins to give way. Part 3. Let us move gently into Part 3, as though the night has deepened further and the world has grown still. The sounds of the day have faded. Only distant footsteps and the occasional murmur of voices remain. I continue on as background historian, carrying us forward into a time when tension begins to shift, almost imperceptibly, into resolve. By the middle of the 1st century, patience in Judea is wearing thin. Years of taxation, surveillance, and interference have accumulated like layers of dust. Each layer on its own might have been endured. Together, they weigh heavily on the spirit of the people. What was once frustration now hardens into conviction for some. The belief grows that coexistence with Rome may no longer be possible. Jerusalem becomes the focal point of this change. The city feels crowded not just with pilgrims, but with emotion. Religious festivals amplify every feeling. Joy and devotion exist alongside anger and fear. Each gathering carries the unspoken question of whether this will be the moment when restraint finally gives way. Roman officials sense the shift, even if they do not fully understand it. Intelligence is gathered. Patrols increase. The temple itself, sacred to the Jewish people, is watched carefully. Rome knows that symbols hold power, and few symbols in the empire rival the influence of the temple in Jerusalem. Within Jewish society, voices advocating resistance grow louder. These are not unified voices. Some imagine a divinely guided uprising, one that will restore sovereignty through faith and courage. Others speak in more practical terms, focusing on strategy, weapons, and timing. Still others caution against rebellion, warning that Rome's response would be devastating. Families are divided by these conversations. Around evening fires and shared meals, disagreement lingers in the air. A son might speak passionately of freedom. A father might respond with memories of past defeats. A mother listens, weighing the safety of her children against the dignity of resistance. Rome's authority begins to falter in small but meaningful ways. Taxes are resisted or delayed. Roman symbols are defaced. Isolated attacks on officials and collaborators occur, often vanishing into the hills before retaliation can follow. These acts are not yet open war, but they signal a shift in mindset. Fear is no longer absolute. Roman governors respond with increasing severity. Punishments become harsher, more visible. Villages suspected of harboring rebels are searched. Arrests are made with little explanation. The intent is clear: to discourage rebellion by demonstrating the cost of defiance. Yet these measures often produce the opposite effect. Each act of brutality strengthens resolve among those already inclined to resist. Stories of injustice spread quickly, carried by travelers and whispered in marketplaces. Memory becomes fuel. Outside the cities, armed groups begin to form more openly. They know the terrain well. Hills and valleys offer cover and escape. These groups see themselves as defenders of faith and land, though Rome labels them criminals and bandits. The gap between these perspectives widens, leaving little room for understanding. The countryside becomes uneasy ground. Roads are no longer entirely safe. Roman patrols move cautiously. Local people watch silently, unsure where loyalty or survival lies. Trust becomes fragile, easily broken by suspicion. Jerusalem remains outwardly functional, but its atmosphere has changed. Roman soldiers are ever present, their armor catching the sun by day and torchlight by night. The temple still stands, prayers still rise, but beneath the rituals there is a sense of impending loss, though no one can say exactly when or how it will come. I imagine standing near the temple steps at dusk. The sky shifts from gold to deep blue. Pilgrims descend the stairs slowly, speaking in hushed tones. A Roman guard watches from a distance, unreadable. Between them stretches a silence heavy with meaning. Rome's greatest misunderstanding lies in its assumption that control equals loyalty. Judea does not function this way. Submission does not erase belief. In many ways, it sharpens it. Faith becomes a quiet declaration of independence, even when no banners are raised. As tensions rise, prophetic language becomes more common. Old texts are revisited, interpreted through the lens of current suffering. Hope takes on urgency. The idea that deliverance must come soon begins to circulate, offering comfort to some and concern to others. The empire, vast and confident, cannot hear these whispers clearly. It sees unrest, not longing. It responds with force, not understanding. Each step it takes to secure Judea seems to push the land closer to open conflict. As Part 3 comes to its close, the stillness of the night feels deceptive. Beneath it, movement is constant. Plans are forming. Lines are being drawn, even if they remain invisible for now. Let us rest here for a moment, in the quiet before the storm. The stars hang overhead, indifferent yet enduring. In the next part, we will begin to witness the first unmistakable signs that restraint has ended, and that the path toward irreversible change has begun. Part 4. Let us continue softly into Part 4, as though the night air has grown heavier and the silence more deliberate. I remain beside you as background historian, and together we step into a moment when the careful balance of Judea finally begins to slip. The shift does not arrive with a single trumpet call or a clear declaration. Instead, it comes through a series of moments that, taken alone, might seem small. A confrontation in a street. An insult left unanswered. A punishment that lingers too long in memory. Each moment settles into the next, until the weight becomes impossible to ignore. In Jerusalem, Roman authority begins to feel less stable. Officials struggle to maintain control without provoking open revolt. They rely on displays of strength, yet each display feeds resentment. Soldiers patrol more aggressively. Arrests become less restrained. Sacred customs are occasionally violated, sometimes through ignorance, sometimes through deliberate disregard. One such violation carries particular weight. When Roman officials interfere with temple practices or seize funds meant for sacred use, outrage spreads quickly. The temple is not simply a place of worship. It is the heart of Jewish life, bound to identity, memory, and covenant. Any threat to it is felt as a threat to the people themselves. Crowds gather more easily now. Anger moves faster than before. Voices rise where once they were hushed. Roman soldiers respond with force, and force invites resistance. The space for peaceful resolution narrows further, pressed from both sides. Beyond Jerusalem, unrest spreads unevenly but persistently. In towns and villages, Roman officials face quiet defiance. Some refuse cooperation. Others disappear into the countryside, joining armed groups already familiar with the hills and paths. These groups grow bolder, testing Rome's reach and patience. Rome answers with punishment meant to be exemplary. Entire villages are fined. Homes are searched. Suspected rebels are executed publicly. The intent is to isolate resistance, to make it appear futile. Yet the effect is often the opposite. Suffering shared becomes suffering remembered, and memory binds people together. Within Jewish society, divisions deepen. Those who once urged caution now struggle to be heard. The momentum of anger carries many forward, even those unsure of the destination. Others withdraw entirely, convinced that violence will only lead to ruin. Community bonds strain under the weight of these choices. Families feel the strain most acutely. Sons vanish into the hills. Fathers argue for restraint and are ignored. Mothers prepare meals with quiet dread, unsure who will return at night. Children sense fear even when no words are spoken, learning early that safety is uncertain. Rome begins to see Judea not merely as restless, but as dangerous. Reports travel up the chain of command, describing increasing instability. Decisions are made far from the land itself, shaped by imperial priorities rather than local realities. More troops are dispatched. Authority hardens. The presence of Roman forces becomes overwhelming. Camps are established near population centers. Roads fill with marching soldiers. Supply lines cut through fields once used for grazing and farming. The land itself feels occupied in ways that cannot be ignored. Jerusalem, meanwhile, becomes a place of constant friction. Pilgrims continue to arrive, drawn by faith and obligation, but they enter a city thick with suspicion. Roman soldiers watch every gathering. Every prayer spoken aloud feels like it might be misinterpreted. I imagine standing near a city gate as dusk falls. A group of pilgrims arrives, tired but hopeful. Nearby, a Roman officer surveys the scene, hand resting casually on his sword. No words are exchanged, yet the tension is unmistakable. Each side watches the other, waiting. As resistance grows more visible, Rome's response becomes increasingly indiscriminate. Not all who suffer have taken up arms, but distinction matters less in the pursuit of order. Innocence offers little protection. This reality settles heavily on the population, reshaping how people see both Rome and their own future. Faith, however, does not dissolve. In many ways, it intensifies. Prayer becomes more urgent. Study becomes more focused. The idea that suffering has meaning, that endurance is itself an act of faith, offers comfort amid uncertainty. Tradition becomes a shelter when the physical world feels unstable. At the same time, expectations of deliverance grow stronger. Old promises are revisited with new intensity. The belief that history is moving toward a decisive moment gains traction. For some, this belief inspires hope. For others, it heightens fear. Rome does not hear these in occurrence. It sees unrest measured in numbers and incidents, not in longing or despair. Its tools remain military and administrative, blunt instruments applied to a complex and deeply rooted problem. As Part 4 draws to a close, the sense of inevitability grows. The fragile calm of earlier years has vanished. What remains is a landscape marked by watchfulness, resentment, and readiness. The night around us feels tense now, as though even the stones are listening. Fires burn low. Conversations are brief. Decisions are made quietly, often without full certainty. Let us pause here in this uneasy stillness. In the next part, we will move closer to the breaking point, when scattered resistance gathers into something unmistakable, and when the consequences of defiance and domination become impossible to escape. Part 5. Let us move gently into Part 5, as though the night has reached its deepest hour and the world is holding its breath. I remain with you as background historian, and together we step into the moment when tension finally crosses the threshold into open rupture. By this time, restraint is no longer the dominant instinct in Judea. Years of pressure have reshaped the way people think about survival, dignity, and faith. What once felt unthinkable now feels inevitable to many. The belief takes hold that waiting has cost too much, and that action, however dangerous, may be the only remaining choice. In Jerusalem, the spark comes quickly and unexpectedly, though in truth it has been waiting for years. A dispute involving Roman authority ignites a crowd. Voices rise. Stones are thrown. Roman soldiers respond as they always have, with force meant to restore order. But this time, order does not return. Instead, resistance spreads through the streets like fire through dry brush. What begins as a riot hardens into rebellion. Roman symbols are attacked. Garrisons are overwhelmed in isolated moments. The city shifts from tense to unstable in a matter of days. Control slips, not entirely, but enough to embolden those who have waited for such an opening. News travels fast. Across Judea, word spreads that Rome has been challenged openly, and that it has faltered. Armed groups emerge from hiding, stepping into daylight with new confidence. Villages once cautious now shelter fighters openly. The idea that Rome might be driven out no longer feels like distant hope, but like a possibility worth risking everything for. Within Jerusalem, authority fragments. Local leaders struggle to guide events they no longer fully control. Some attempt to restore calm, fearing the consequences of defiance. Others embrace the uprising, believing that history has reached its turning point. Compromise becomes nearly impossible in the heat of unfolding events. Rome reacts with urgency. Reports of rebellion reach provincial and imperial leaders, stripped of nuance and filled with alarm. Judea is no longer merely restless. It is in open revolt. The response is swift and uncompromising. Legions are mobilized. Experienced commanders are assigned. The goal is no longer containment, but suppression. As Roman forces move toward Judea, the land changes again. Roads fill with marching troops. Camps rise along hills and plains. The sheer scale of Rome's military power becomes visible in a way few civilians have ever seen. For some, this sight brings fear and doubt. For others, it only deepens resolve. To retreat now would mean surrendering not just land, but meaning. Inside Jerusalem, daily life unravels. Markets falter. Supplies grow uncertain. Streets once filled with pilgrims now echo with hurried footsteps and shouted warnings. Barricades appear where none existed before. People learn quickly which paths are safest, which hours to avoid being outside. Families are forced into impossible decisions. Some send children away, hoping distance will offer protection. Others keep everyone close, unwilling to be separated in a time of danger. Homes become shelters, meeting places, or targets, depending on circumstance and suspicion. Faith remains central, though it too is tested. Prayer becomes constant, whispered in corners and shouted in crowds. Some interpret events as fulfillment of ancient promises. Others fear that the cost will be unbearable. Yet even fear is shaped by belief. To suffer for faith can be understood as purpose, not only loss. Roman forces advance methodically. Towns that resist are punished harshly. Warnings are issued, then enforced. The empire seeks to demonstrate that rebellion brings only destruction. Villages are burned. Fields are ruined. The landscape bears scars that will not heal quickly. Still, resistance continues. Fighters use their knowledge of terrain to delay and harass Roman units. Narrow passes and hidden paths offer brief advantage. These moments of success are celebrated, even as the broader reality becomes clear. Rome's resources are vast. Its patience is limited. Jerusalem braces itself. The city prepares for siege, though few fully understand what that will mean. Walls are reinforced. Supplies are gathered where possible. Hope and dread coexist uneasily. The sense of standing at the edge of history becomes overwhelming. I imagine standing on a rooftop at dusk, looking out over the city. Smoke rises in thin lines. Voices carry on the wind, urgent and uncertain. Beyond the walls, Roman camps glow with ordered firelight, rows of tents stretching into the distance. The contrast is stark. One side driven by devotion and desperation, the other by discipline and power. As the first engagements between Roman legions and Jewish forces unfold, the cost becomes undeniable. Casualties mount. Loss touches every community. The idea of a quick or clean resolution fades. What lies ahead will be long and brutal. Yet even now, identity does not dissolve. If anything, it sharpens. To be Jewish in this moment is to carry history forward under unimaginable strain. Songs are sung quietly. Stories are told to steady trembling hearts. Memory becomes armor when no other protection remains. As Part 5 comes to its close, the die has been cast. Rebellion is no longer a possibility. It is a reality. Rome is committed to crushing it. Judea is committed to resisting, whatever the cost. The night around us feels heavy, filled with distant sounds of movement and preparation. Sleep comes fitfully, if at all. Tomorrow promises violence, loss, and irreversible change. Let us rest here for a moment, in this fragile pause between decision and consequence. In the next part, we will move into the full weight of Rome's response, and begin to witness the unraveling of a world that can never return to what it once was. Part 6. Let us move carefully into Part 6, as though dawn is beginning to pale the sky but brings no comfort with its light. I remain here as background historian, and together we step into the long, grinding phase that follows the moment of open rebellion, when Rome begins to apply the full weight of its empire. The arrival of Roman legions is not sudden, but it is unmistakable. They move with discipline and purpose, their progress slow and deliberate. Each step forward is measured. Each encampment is planned. To Rome, war is not chaos. It is order imposed through force. Roads are secured. Supply lines are protected. Resistance is mapped, categorized, and systematically addressed. For those living in Judea, this methodical advance is deeply unsettling. There is no dramatic charge to brace against, no single moment to endure and then recover from. Instead, there is a constant presence, a steady tightening, like a cord being drawn ever closer. Towns that once offered shelter to rebels now face consequences. Roman commanders send messages ahead, offering clemency in exchange for submission. Some communities accept, lowering their defenses and opening their gates in hope of mercy. Others refuse, bound by loyalty, fear, or belief that surrender would betray something deeper than survival. When resistance is encountered, Rome responds with clarity and cruelty. Walls are breached. Fighters are executed publicly. Civilians are punished alongside them, not always for what they have done, but for what Rome believes they might do if spared. The intent is unmistakable. To break not only bodies, but resolve. News of these events travels faster than the legions themselves. Refugees move toward Jerusalem, carrying stories of destruction and loss. Each story adds to the sense of inevitability. The countryside empties unevenly, with families abandoning farms that have sustained them for generations. Fields go untended. Wells are left behind. The land begins to feel hollowed out. Jerusalem swells with people and fear. The city's population grows far beyond what it was meant to hold. Supplies strain under the pressure. Water becomes precious. Space becomes scarce. Streets are crowded not with celebration, but with anxious movement and whispered debate. Inside the city, leadership fractures further. Different factions argue over strategy, authority, and faith. Some urge unity against Rome. Others accuse rivals of betrayal or incompetence. Old disagreements, once manageable, now flare dangerously. The shared threat does not always produce shared purpose. The temple still stands at the center of the city, both physically and spiritually. People continue to gather there, drawn by habit, hope, and desperation. Prayers rise constantly, sometimes orderly, sometimes frantic. The belief that divine protection will preserve the city persists, even as Roman camps tighten their ring outside the walls. Rome understands the symbolic importance of Jerusalem. Its commanders know that taking the city will mean more than a military victory. It will be a statement, one intended to echo across the empire. Plans are drawn carefully. Siege works are prepared. Patience becomes Rome's greatest weapon. As the siege begins in earnest, life inside Jerusalem changes dramatically. Food becomes rationed, either by necessity or by force. Prices rise beyond reason. Hunger creeps in slowly at first, then relentlessly. People grow thinner. Tempers grow shorter. Small kindnesses become acts of quiet heroism. Families adapt as best they can. Meals are reduced to bare essentials. Parents give portions to children, telling them stories to distract from empty stomachs. Elderly relatives are tended with care, even as resources dwindle. Survival becomes a daily calculation. Outside the walls, Roman engineers construct ramps, towers, and earthworks. Their movements are steady and confident, carried out under the protection of shields and formation. From within the city, these preparations are visible, an ever-present reminder that time is not an ally. Skirmishes break out frequently. Defenders launch attacks from the walls, hoping to disrupt construction or morale. Roman forces respond with practiced efficiency. Each exchange costs lives, often without changing the broader balance. Still, these moments matter deeply to those involved. Each successful defense feels like proof that resistance is not meaningless. The emotional toll is immense. Fear and hope exist side by side, rising and falling with each rumor. Some believe relief will come, that Rome will be forced to withdraw. Others sense that the city's fate is sealed. Conversations grow quieter, as if speaking too openly might invite despair. I imagine walking through a narrow street at night. Lamps flicker weakly. Shadows stretch across stone walls. Somewhere nearby, a child cries softly, quickly hushed. Above, the sky is clear and indifferent, stars shining as they always have, untouched by human suffering. Faith continues to anchor many, even as circumstances worsen. Scriptures are recited from memory. Rituals adapt to scarcity. The idea that identity does not depend solely on place begins to take root, though few yet realize how important that idea will become. Rome, meanwhile, waits. Siege is as much about endurance as it is about assault. The empire trusts in time, hunger, and fear to do what swords alone cannot. Supplies continue to flow into Roman camps. Discipline remains strong. The imbalance becomes clearer with each passing day. As Part 6 draws to a close, the sense of confinement tightens. Jerusalem feels smaller, its walls both protective and imprisoning. The outside world fades, replaced by the immediate realities of hunger, fear, and resolve. The night settles again, heavy and restless. Fires burn low within the city, while beyond the walls Roman torches glow in orderly lines, unwavering. Let us pause here, in this narrowing space. In the next part, we will move deeper into the siege itself, where desperation grows sharper, and where the cost of resistance begins to reshape lives in ways that will echo far beyond these walls. Part 7. Let us move quietly into Part 7, as though the night has stretched long and sleep comes only in brief, uneasy moments. I remain beside you as background historian, and together we stay within the walls of Jerusalem as the siege tightens and time itself begins to feel distorted. Days no longer pass in familiar patterns. Morning and evening still arrive, but they bring little change. Hunger has become a constant companion, dull at first, then sharp and demanding. Food that once seemed simple and plentiful is now remembered with longing. Bread is rationed carefully. Water is guarded. Each bite is measured, each swallow considered. Inside the city, people adapt in ways they never imagined they would need to. Wealth loses much of its meaning. Coins cannot fill empty stomachs. What matters now is access to grain, to hidden stores, to anything that can be eaten. Old hierarchies soften or collapse entirely as survival becomes the shared concern of all. Tension within the city grows heavier with each passing day. Different groups accuse one another of hoarding or betrayal. Trust erodes under the strain. Even neighbors who once shared meals now eye one another cautiously. Desperation changes how people see each other, not always for the better. Violence does not only come from outside the walls. Clashes erupt within the city as factions struggle for control and resources. These internal conflicts weaken Jerusalem further, though many sense it even as they feel unable to stop it. Fear turns inward as easily as it turns outward. Still, moments of quiet humanity persist. A mother sings softly to her child to mask the sound of hunger. An elder recites familiar prayers, his voice steady even as his body weakens. Friends share memories of better days, clinging to words when comfort is scarce. These small acts do not change the siege, but they preserve something essential. From the walls, the Roman presence is impossible to ignore. Their camps remain orderly and supplied. Their routines continue with precision. Siege engines are adjusted and improved. Earthworks rise higher. Each visible advance feels like a reminder that time favors the empire, not the city. Roman soldiers rotate shifts, rest, and eat. Inside Jerusalem, there is no such balance. Exhaustion settles into bones and minds. Sleep is shallow and broken by fear, noise, or pain. Dreams, when they come, are often filled with images of food, water, or escape. Disease begins to spread quietly, fed by crowded conditions and weakened bodies. Healers do what they can with limited resources. Herbs replace medicines that are no longer available. Care becomes an act of devotion rather than confidence. Loss becomes more frequent, and grief has little space to breathe. The temple remains a focal point, though even it cannot escape the siege reach. Rituals continue where possible, adapted to scarcity and danger. The act of gathering itself becomes meaningful. To stand together, to pray together, feels like resistance against erasure. Yet doubt grows alongside faith. Some begin to question whether the city will be spared. Others cling more tightly to belief, convinced that endurance will be rewarded. These differing responses coexist uneasily, often within the same person. Hope and despair are not opposites here. They are companions, rising and falling together. Outside the walls, Roman commanders remain patient. They understand the effects of hunger and fear. Assaults are calculated, not rushed. When attacks come, they are meant to test defenses and morale rather than end the siege outright. Each clash drains energy and resources from those inside. The sounds of war become part of daily life. The thud of stones. The creak of wood. Shouted commands in unfamiliar tongues. At night, the glow of Roman fires paints the hills in steady lines of light, a silent reminder that the city is surrounded. I imagine walking through Jerusalem at dusk. The air smells of smoke and dust. Voices are low. Footsteps echo softly in narrow streets. Doors close early, not for rest but for safety. The city feels smaller now, folded inward on itself. Children grow quiet in ways that feel unnatural. They learn quickly not to ask for food that is not there. Play becomes rare. Their world shrinks to walls, shadows, and whispered reassurance. These early lessons will shape them long after the siege ends, if they survive it. As resources dwindle further, difficult choices emerge. Some venture out under cover of darkness, hoping to slip past Roman lines in search of food or escape. Many do not return. Each absence is felt deeply, though often without words. Despite everything, stories continue to circulate. Tales of endurance from earlier generations. Reminders that identity has survived exile and oppression before. These stories do not fill stomachs, but they steady hearts. To remember survival is to imagine it again. Rome's power feels absolute, yet it is also distant in a strange way. The soldiers beyond the walls seem untouched by the suffering inside. This distance deepens resentment and sorrow, but it also clarifies something important. Control of land does not equal control of meaning. As Part 7 draws to a close, the city feels suspended in a fragile state between endurance and collapse. Each day survived feels both like a victory and a step closer to exhaustion. Time stretches, thin and relentless. The night settles once more, heavy with unspoken fears. Lamps flicker weakly. The walls stand, for now. Let us pause here together, breathing quietly in this crowded stillness. In the next part, we will move closer to the breaking moments of the siege, when hunger and fear push life beyond its limits, and when the fate of Jerusalem begins to reveal itself in irreversible ways. Part 8. Let us move gently into Part 8, as though the air itself has grown thinner and every sound carries farther than it should. I remain with you as background historian, walking slowly through Jerusalem as the siege enters its most fragile and painful stage. By now, hunger is no longer a passing ache. It has settled deeply into bodies and minds. People move more slowly. Faces grow hollow. Strength fades in small, quiet ways that are impossible to reverse once they begin. Even standing for prayer becomes difficult for many, though they continue to do so, leaning on walls or one another. Food stores that once seemed hidden and secure are nearly gone. Grain jars sit empty. Dried fruits have been reduced to memory. Anything that can be eaten has already been tried. The smell of cooking, once a daily comfort, has vanished almost entirely. Smoke now rises only from small fires meant for warmth or light. Within homes, families face decisions that feel unbearable. Parents divide what little remains, often giving their portions to children while insisting they are not hungry. Elders insist on being last, their voices gentle but firm. These quiet sacrifices are rarely spoken of, yet they define the moral heart of the city in this moment. Tension within Jerusalem sharpens further as scarcity deepens. Accusations spread quickly. Rumors of hidden supplies spark anger and violence. Some homes are searched by force, not by Roman soldiers, but by neighbors driven by desperation. Trust collapses under the pressure of survival. Still, there are moments of unexpected kindness. A shared sip of water. A small piece of bread divided carefully. A stranger offering comfort instead of suspicion. These acts are brief and fragile, yet they shine brightly against the surrounding darkness. Disease tightens its grip as bodies weaken. Illness spreads more easily among the hungry and exhausted. Healers continue their work with limited tools, relying on knowledge passed down through generations. They offer what comfort they can, even when cures are beyond reach. Grief becomes constant. Death is no longer rare or shocking. It is woven into daily life. Funerals are brief, often quiet, sometimes impossible. The living carry loss silently, too tired for extended mourning. Memory becomes the only marker left for many who are gone. The temple still draws people, though fewer have the strength to walk there. Its presence remains powerful, a reminder of continuity even as the world collapses around it. Prayers are spoken slowly now, shaped by fatigue and longing. Some pray for deliverance. Others pray simply for endurance. Outside the walls, Rome continues its work with unwavering discipline. Siege engines are adjusted. Ramps grow closer. The sound of construction carries into the city day and night. Each scrape of stone feels like a heartbeat counting down time. Roman commanders understand that the city is weakening. They can see it in the lack of response to probing attacks, in the slower movement along the walls. They wait patiently, confident that hunger and exhaustion will finish what force alone has not yet accomplished. Inside Jerusalem, hope becomes fragile but not entirely extinguished. Some still believe that relief will come, that Rome will withdraw or be forced to compromise. Others sense that the end is near, though they cannot say exactly how it will arrive. These beliefs coexist uneasily, often within the same household. Children sense the gravity of the moment even if they cannot name it. They grow quiet and observant. Their questions soften or disappear altogether. They watch adults closely, learning fear and resilience side by side. These lessons will linger long after the siege ends, shaping lives in unseen ways. Night brings little relief. Sleep is shallow and interrupted. Dreams are filled with images of abundance and safety, which make waking all the more painful. The sounds of Roman activity beyond the walls never fully fade, a constant reminder that escape is unlikely. Some attempt to flee the city under cover of darkness. A few succeed. Many are caught. Their absence leaves questions that go unanswered. Each attempt reinforces the sense that the walls are not only a defense but a trap. Faith continues to adapt. Without offerings or proper materials, rituals are simplified. Words replace actions where necessary. The idea that devotion can survive without a place begins to take shape quietly, though its full significance is not yet understood. I imagine standing in a narrow alley at dawn. The light is pale and cool. The city feels exhausted, as though it has been holding its breath for too long. Somewhere, a prayer is whispered. Somewhere else, a body is carried away in silence. Rome prepares for the final stages. Assault plans are refined. Signals are rehearsed. There is no hurry now. The outcome feels assured from their perspective. Control will be restored. Order will be imposed. Inside the city, the sense of inevitability grows heavier with each passing hour. Even those who still hope feel the weight of what is coming. The future, once imagined in many forms, narrows into a single uncertain path. As Part 8 draws to a close, Jerusalem feels suspended between life and collapse. The walls still stand. The temple still rises. But the strength that sustained them is fading. The night settles once more, quiet and heavy. The lamps burn low. Breath comes slowly. Let us pause here together, holding this moment of fragile endurance. In the next part, we will move into the final days of the siege, when the boundaries between survival, loss, and transformation blur, and when the world that has been known begins to fall away. Part 9. Let us move softly into Part 9, as though time itself has slowed to a near standstill. I remain here as background historian, walking quietly through Jerusalem as the siege reaches its final, irreversible phase. By now, the city is exhausted. Not only in body, but in spirit. Hunger has stripped life down to its most basic elements. People no longer speak of days ahead. They speak only of the next hour, the next breath, the next small task required to remain standing. The future feels distant and unreal. The walls still rise around the city, but they no longer feel strong. They feel thin, stretched by weeks of strain. Defenders move slowly along them, conserving energy. Their eyes track Roman movements beyond the gates, aware that every preparation signals an approaching end. Inside the city, order has nearly dissolved. Leadership means little when there is nothing left to distribute or promise. Authority fragments into small, desperate clusters. Some cling to prayer. Others to anger. Others simply withdraw into silence, conserving what little strength remains. Hunger now shapes thought itself. Conversations drift, lose focus, trail off. People forget words mid-sentence. Memory falters. Faces once familiar become harder to recognize beneath layers of fatigue and loss. The city feels ghost-like, inhabited by figures moving through routines without the energy to question them. Death has become a constant presence. Bodies are no longer counted carefully. There is no space, no time, no strength for proper farewell. Grief compresses inward, becoming something heavy and quiet rather than openly expressed. Survival leaves little room for mourning. The temple still stands, but it too feels changed. Its courtyards are quieter. Rituals are shortened or abandoned entirely. Yet its presence continues to draw people, not because it promises rescue, but because it represents continuity. Even now, it holds the memory of who they have been. Outside the walls, Roman preparations are complete. Siege ramps reach their intended height. Engines are positioned carefully. Signals are reviewed. The soldiers know what comes next, and they are ready. There is no excitement among them, only discipline. This is not glory. It is procedure. When the first major breach attempt begins, it is unmistakable. The sounds are louder, closer, relentless. Stones strike walls with heavy force. Shouts rise from both sides. Smoke drifts upward, blurring the sky. The city trembles, not just physically, but emotionally. Defenders respond as best they can, though many are too weak to fight for long. Every effort costs precious energy. Still, resistance continues, fueled not by hope of victory, but by refusal to surrender identity. To resist is to assert existence, even when defeat feels certain. Within the city, those not fighting huddle wherever they can. Homes, courtyards, narrow streets become shelters. Parents hold children close, whispering reassurance they no longer fully believe. Elders sit quietly, eyes closed, offering prayers shaped by acceptance rather than expectation. As breaches widen, panic spreads unevenly. Some run. Others freeze. Some remain where they are, unwilling or unable to move. The noise becomes overwhelming, a mixture of crashing stone, shouted commands, and cries carried on the air. Rome advances steadily once the walls are compromised. There is no chaos in their movement. Formations hold. Commands are followed. The imbalance of power becomes unmistakable. The city that once stood proud now feels fragile and exposed. Fires begin to appear in different parts of Jerusalem. Smoke thickens, turning daylight dim and uncertain. Familiar streets become difficult to navigate. Landmarks vanish behind flame and debris. Orientation is lost, both physically and emotionally. Through all of this, moments of humanity persist. A stranger helps another stand. A hand reaches out in the dark. A shared prayer passes quietly from mouth to mouth. These moments do not change the outcome, but they shape how it is endured. I imagine standing at a distance, watching the city dissolve into sound and smoke. The weight of history presses heavily here. This is not just a military defeat. It is the unmaking of a world that has existed for centuries, shaped by land, ritual, and shared memory. As the fighting pushes inward, the reality becomes undeniable. Jerusalem will fall. Not perhaps today, but soon. The question is no longer whether loss will come, but how it will be remembered. Even now, identity does not disappear. It adapts. It gathers inward. It prepares to survive without walls, without a city, without the center that once defined it. This transformation begins quietly, almost unnoticed amid the noise and destruction. As Part 9 comes to a close, the city stands on the edge of collapse. Smoke hangs in the air. The sound of conflict echoes endlessly. What remains of Jerusalem is changing before our eyes. Let us pause here together, breathing slowly in the midst of this unraveling. In the next part, we will witness the fall itself, the destruction that reshapes faith, memory, and existence, and the beginning of a long journey away from a shattered center. Part 10. Let us move quietly into Part 10, as though the air is thick with ash and time itself has slowed under the weight of what is unfolding. I remain with you as background historian, walking carefully through the final moments of a city that has endured more than it was ever meant to bear. The fall does not arrive all at once. It comes in waves, each one eroding what little remains. Roman forces push steadily inward, street by street, courtyard by courtyard. Resistance flickers and fades, not because the will is gone, but because the body can no longer answer it. Exhaustion settles like a final verdict. Jerusalem is no longer a single place. It has fractured into pockets of fear, smoke, and confusion. Familiar routes vanish beneath rubble. Walls that once guided daily life now funnel people into dead ends. Orientation is lost. The city feels unfamiliar even to those who have lived here all their lives. Fire spreads with frightening ease. Dry wood, cloth, and stored materials ignite quickly. Flames climb walls and leap across narrow streets. Smoke fills the air, stinging eyes and lungs. Daylight dims into a muted, wavering glow. Breathing becomes difficult, each breath a conscious effort. The sounds are overwhelming. The crash of collapsing stone. The roar of fire. Shouted commands in harsh, clipped tones. Cries that rise and fall without clear direction. Beneath it all, there is a low, constant hum of destruction, like the city itself is breaking apart. People flee wherever they can, carrying nothing or clutching small bundles of belongings gathered in panic. Some search for family members, calling names into the smoke. Others move silently, conserving what little strength remains. Many simply stop, unable to go farther. Roman soldiers advance with grim efficiency. This is not chaos to them. It is procedure. Orders are followed. Lines are maintained. The city is treated as territory to be secured, not as a living place filled with memory. This distance allows them to move forward without hesitation. The temple, long the heart of Jerusalem, stands amid the destruction like a final, trembling anchor. For generations, it has been the center of worship, pilgrimage, and identity. Even now, people are drawn toward it, believing that if anything might endure, it will be this. But the temple is not spared. Fire reaches it amid confusion and violence. Flames catch where stone meets wood, where cloth and oil have been stored. Smoke pours upward, dark and heavy. The gold that once reflected sunlight now glows with heat, melting and running into cracks between stones. Those who witness this moment feel something tear loose inside them. The destruction of the temple is not only physical. It feels cosmic, as though the axis of the world has shifted. Centuries of ritual, memory, and meaning collapse in a single, horrifying transformation. Some cry out. Others stand frozen, unable to comprehend what they are seeing. Prayers rise instinctively, not carefully formed, but raw and urgent. The sound of weeping mixes with the roar of fire, carried upward into the smoke-filled sky. Rome understands the significance of this destruction, even if it does not feel it in the same way. The fall of the temple is a statement, meant to be unmistakable. It signals the end of resistance, the breaking of a center that once unified a people. As the temple burns, the city around it continues to fall. Remaining defenders are overwhelmed. Civilians are caught wherever they happen to be. The distinction between fighter and non-combatant disappears entirely in the chaos. By nightfall, Jerusalem is transformed. What once was a living city is now a landscape of ruin. Fires burn unchecked. Smoke hangs low. The air is thick with the smell of ash and loss. Silence begins to creep in, broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant movement of soldiers. Those who survive hide among the ruins or surrender when found. Bodies lie where they fell, uncounted, unnamed. Grief is too vast to be processed all at once. It settles instead into numbness, a protective stillness that allows the mind to endure what the heart cannot yet face. I imagine standing at the edge of the city as dawn approaches. The light reveals devastation in quiet detail. Collapsed walls. Blackened stones. Sacred spaces reduced to rubble. The scale of loss becomes clearer with each passing moment. And yet, even here, identity does not vanish. Among the survivors, something begins to shift inward. Without a city, without a temple, without the familiar structures of life, faith turns toward memory, law, story, and community. What was once anchored to a place begins its long transformation into something portable. This change is not immediate. It begins as shock, as mourning, as disbelief. But beneath the grief, seeds are being planted. The understanding that survival will require adaptation. That identity must be carried within, not built upon stone. As Part 10 comes to a close, Jerusalem is no longer what it was. A world has ended. The night settles over ruins that still glow faintly with heat. Smoke drifts upward, thinning slowly into the dark sky. Let us pause here together, in the aftermath of collapse. Breathe softly. Let the noise fade. In the next part, we will follow the survivors as they are gathered, displaced, and scattered, and begin to trace the long road that leads away from this broken center and into a future shaped by exile, memory, and endurance. Part 11. Let us move gently into Part 11, as though the fires have begun to dim and the air is cooling after a long, unbearable night. I remain here as background historian, walking carefully among the ruins as the aftermath of destruction settles into something quieter, though no less heavy. With Jerusalem fallen, the noise of battle recedes, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Smoke drifts slowly through broken streets. Ash settles on stone and skin alike. The city no longer resists. It endures in silence, bearing the marks of what has been lost. Survivors emerge cautiously from hiding places. Some step out from collapsed homes. Others descend from rooftops or narrow passageways where they sheltered through the worst of the fire and violence. Their movements are slow, tentative, as though the ground itself might give way beneath them. Faces are drawn and distant, eyes scanning for danger that may or may not still be present. Roman soldiers move through the ruins with methodical purpose. They search, secure, and gather. Those who remain are no longer viewed as inhabitants of a city, but as subjects to be processed. Orders are given. Groups are separated. The machinery of empire shifts smoothly from conquest to control. Families are torn apart in these moments, often without ceremony or explanation. Children cling to parents until hands are forced apart. Elders are pushed forward or left behind, depending on their strength. Names are called and lost in the confusion. The sense of self begins to fray under the weight of sudden displacement. Some are executed where they are found, deemed dangerous or unnecessary to spare. Others are taken captive, bound together and marched away from the ruins. Many are sold into slavery, destined for lives far from the land they have known. Each fate feels arbitrary to those who experience it, shaped by timing and circumstance rather than choice. The temple, now reduced to scorched stone, stands as a silent witness to this sorting of lives. People pass by its remains with expressions of disbelief and grief. Some cannot look at it at all. Others stop briefly, touching blackened walls, whispering prayers that feel fragile but necessary. For those taken away, the journey begins almost immediately. Lines of captives move slowly along roads once used for pilgrimage and trade. Feet stumble over stones. Throats burn with thirst. The landscape stretches out unfamiliar and indifferent. With each step, distance grows between survivors and the place that shaped them. Those left behind face a different kind of emptiness. Jerusalem is no longer a home. It is a scar. Returning to daily life is impossible. Fields are ruined. Homes are destroyed. Sacred spaces are gone. Survival now means finding somewhere else to begin again, even if the beginning feels impossibly small. Grief moves through people in waves. Some weep openly when the shock fades. Others grow quiet, withdrawing into themselves. Many feel guilt for surviving when so many did not. These emotions settle deeply, carried forward long after the moment has passed. And yet, amid loss, something subtle begins to take shape. Without the temple, worship changes. Without the city, community must be reimagined. Elders and teachers gather survivors where they can, beneath open skies or in borrowed spaces. They speak of law, of story, of memory. They remind one another that identity was never only stone and sacrifice. It was always also word, practice, and shared meaning. This realization does not erase pain, but it offers direction. Faith begins its long shift away from place and toward people. What cannot be rebuilt in Jerusalem will be carried outward, into homes, gatherings, and hearts wherever survivors find themselves. For those marched into exile, this adaptation becomes essential. Far from familiar land, they cling to customs as anchors. Prayer becomes portable. Study replaces sacrifice. Community forms wherever enough people gather with shared memory and intent. Rome believes it has ended a problem. From its perspective, rebellion has been crushed. A city destroyed. Order restored. Triumph is declared. Monuments will be raised. Stories will be told of victory and control. But Rome misunderstands what has truly survived. What remains after Jerusalem's fall is not submission, but transformation. A people without a center begin to redefine what center means. Identity loosens its ties to geography and strengthens its connection to tradition and collective memory. I imagine a small group resting by the roadside at dusk. They share water quietly. Someone begins to recite a familiar passage, voice steady despite exhaustion. Others listen, eyes closed. For a moment, they are no longer prisoners or refugees. They are a community. As Part 11 draws to a close, the road stretches onward, uncertain and long. Behind us lies ruin. Ahead lies exile, adaptation, and the slow work of survival. The world has changed irreversibly, but life continues to move forward, step by careful step. Let us pause here together, breathing softly in this fragile quiet. In the next part, we will follow the paths of exile more closely, tracing how displacement reshapes daily life, belief, and belonging, and how memory becomes a home when place is lost. Part 12. Let us move gently into Part 12, as though the road beneath our feet stretches long and quiet, and the noise of Jerusalem has finally faded behind us. I remain here as background historian, walking alongside those who have survived, following them into a world reshaped by distance and loss. Exile does not arrive as a single moment. It unfolds slowly, step by step, mile by mile. For those forced from Judea, the land changes gradually. Familiar hills flatten into open plains. Stone gives way to dust. The air smells different. Even the light seems altered, as though the sun itself behaves differently in unfamiliar places. Those marched away by Roman forces travel in groups, bound by circumstance rather than choice. Some walk in silence, conserving energy. Others whisper to one another, sharing names of places left behind, trying to anchor themselves in memory. Every so often, someone stumbles, and the line pauses only briefly before moving on again. For many, this journey is the first time they have left their homeland. The realization settles slowly and painfully. Each step forward confirms that return is uncertain, perhaps impossible. Grief resurfaces in unexpected ways, triggered by a familiar plant, a shared song, or the rhythm of walking that leaves too much room for thought. Those who escape captivity face exile of a different kind. Scattered survivors make their way toward neighboring regions, relying on hospitality where it can be found. Some settle temporarily with distant relatives or sympathetic communities. Others move constantly, uncertain where safety lies. Displacement becomes a way of life. Daily routines must be rebuilt from nothing. Meals are improvised. Work is sought wherever possible. Languages unfamiliar to the ear surround them, reminding them constantly that they are outsiders. Even simple tasks carry a sense of effort and vigilance. Children adapt more quickly than adults, though not without cost. They learn new words. They mimic new customs. Yet they also absorb loss quietly, storing it deep within themselves. Elders watch this adaptation with mixed emotion, grateful for survival, fearful of forgetting. Faith becomes the most reliable companion in exile. Without a temple, worship shifts fully into homes and gatherings. Prayer no longer depends on place, but on time and intention. Sacred texts are memorized, copied when possible, recited aloud so they will not be lost. Teachers and scholars take on renewed importance. They become anchors of continuity, reminding communities of laws, stories, and practices that define who they are. Instruction happens wherever space allows, under trees, in rented rooms, beside hearths. Learning becomes an act of preservation. Sabbaths are still marked, even when the surroundings are unfamiliar. Candles are lit where they can be. Blessings are spoken softly. These moments create a rhythm that steadies hearts. Time itself becomes sacred when place no longer can be. Food, when available, carries meaning beyond nourishment. Recipes are remembered and adapted using local ingredients. Each familiar taste becomes a link to the past, a quiet declaration that identity has not dissolved. Shared meals reinforce belonging in lands that do not yet feel like home. Rome watches these scattered communities from a distance. From the imperial perspective, the problem appears resolved. Rebellion has been crushed. The land has been secured. Attention shifts elsewhere. The empire rarely concerns itself with what happens inside the hearts of those it has displaced. Yet it is precisely there that something enduring is taking shape. Without a central sanctuary, belief becomes flexible, resilient. Law replaces sacrifice. Study replaces ritual bound to place. Community replaces geography. These changes are not concessions to Rome. They are adaptations born of necessity and faith. I imagine a small gathering at dusk in a foreign town. Lamps glow softly. People sit close together. A familiar prayer begins, spoken slowly, carefully. Outside, the sounds of an unfamiliar city continue, indifferent. Inside, a sense of belonging forms, fragile but real. Memory becomes a shared responsibility. Stories of Jerusalem are told and retold, not only as mourning, but as teaching. Children learn the names of streets they have never walked. They learn of a temple they have never seen. Through story, the lost city remains alive. This transmission is deliberate. Elders know that survival depends on remembrance. Forgetting would mean surrendering what Rome could never truly conquer. Identity, once internalized, cannot be destroyed by armies. As Part 12 draws to a close, exile begins to feel less like a pause and more like a condition. Life does not return to what it was. Instead, it reshapes itself slowly, unevenly, with moments of pain and moments of quiet strength. The road continues forward, winding through unfamiliar landscapes. Yet within those who walk it, something steady endures. Let us pause here together, breathing softly in this new stillness. In the next part, we will explore how these scattered communities begin to take root, forming the early shape of a diaspora that will carry memory, faith, and identity across centuries. Part 13. Let us move softly into Part 13, as though the road has finally led us to places where movement slows and people begin, cautiously, to rest. I remain here as background historian, walking among scattered communities as exile settles into something more permanent, and the shape of a diaspora begins to emerge. At first, settlement feels tentative. Nothing about it seems certain or complete. Families stay close to one another, unsure how long they will be allowed to remain. Homes are modest, often borrowed or temporary. Belongings are few. Yet even in these early stages, patterns begin to form. Wherever small groups gather, community follows. People seek one another out instinctively, drawn by shared language, custom, and memory. A few households become many. Conversations deepen. Support networks emerge quietly, shaped by necessity and trust. What was once centered in Jerusalem now unfolds in fragments, each one carrying a piece of the whole. These early communities appear across the eastern Mediterranean and beyond. Some settle in cities long connected to trade and learning. Others remain closer to Judea, hoping, even if silently, that return might someday be possible. Distance does not weaken identity. In some ways, it sharpens it. Without a temple, spiritual life continues to evolve. Study becomes central, not as replacement, but as foundation. Sacred texts are discussed line by line, their meanings explored carefully. Law and ethics move to the forefront, offering guidance for life wherever one finds oneself. Gathering places take shape, modest at first. Rooms in homes. Open courtyards. Shaded spaces near markets. These become places of prayer, learning, and discussion. They do not mirror the grandeur of the temple, but they serve a different purpose. They make faith accessible, adaptable, and shared. Leadership, too, changes. Authority is no longer tied to a single location or priestly hierarchy. Instead, teachers, scholars, and elders guide communities through knowledge and example. Their influence travels with them, carried through words rather than walls. Children grow up in these new environments, surrounded by both continuity and change. They speak local languages alongside their own. They learn customs of their surroundings while being taught the traditions of their people. Identity becomes layered rather than singular. This layering is not without tension. Questions arise. How much adaptation is too much? What must remain unchanged? These discussions unfold slowly, often gently, shaped by the desire to survive without disappearing. Balance becomes the guiding principle. Memory plays a central role. Stories of Jerusalem are told not only as history, but as orientation. They remind communities where they come from and why their practices matter. The past is not treated as unreachable. It is woven into daily life, guiding decisions and values. Rituals continue to evolve. Prayer schedules replace pilgrimage. Study cycles replace sacrificial calendars. The rhythm of life adapts, creating a structure that can endure across borders and generations. Time becomes sacred when place cannot be. Economic life stabilizes gradually. People learn new trades. Old skills are adapted to new markets. Cooperation within communities helps ease hardship. Mutual aid becomes common, reinforcing bonds and shared responsibility. Rome remains present, though often at a distance. In many places, Jewish communities are allowed a measure of autonomy, so long as order is maintained. This fragile tolerance creates space for life to continue, even if it never feels entirely secure. What emerges from this period is not a diminished identity, but a transformed one. Faith no longer depends on a single city. Belonging no longer requires a shared landscape. Community becomes portable, resilient, capable of surviving displacement. I imagine an evening gathering in a distant city. Lamps glow softly. People sit close together, voices low and thoughtful. A familiar prayer begins, shaped by accents slightly different than before, yet unmistakably the same. Outside, the world moves on, unaware of the continuity unfolding within these walls. This quiet endurance is Rome's great miscalculation. The empire measures success in territory and control. It does not account for memory carried in people, or identity sustained through practice and teaching. What cannot be seen from above continues to grow below. As Part 13 draws to a close, the diaspora is no longer only a response to loss. It is becoming a way of life. Communities take root. Traditions adapt. The past is carried forward deliberately, carefully, with intention. The road no longer feels like endless movement. It feels like many small beginnings. Let us pause here together, breathing softly in this settled quiet. In the next part, we will explore how memory of Jerusalem and the trauma of its fall continue to shape belief, hope, and longing across generations, even as life moves forward in distant lands. Part 14. Let us drift gently into Part 14, as though evening has settled over many distant towns at once, each lit by a few quiet lamps, each carrying the same memories beneath different skies. I remain with you as background historian, listening now not to marching feet or falling stone, but to the softer, longer echoes of loss and remembrance. As years pass, the destruction of Jerusalem does not fade. It changes shape. What was once raw grief slowly becomes something steadier, more internal. The memory of the city, and of the temple at its heart, settles into ritual, story, and longing. It becomes a presence carried forward rather than a wound constantly reopened. In scattered communities, Jerusalem is spoken of with care. Not always loudly, not always with tears, but with a reverence that deepens over time. Children learn its name early. They hear of its streets, its hills, its festivals. They imagine a place they have never seen, yet somehow know. This remembering is deliberate. Elders understand that memory is fragile if left unattended. Stories are repeated, details preserved. Not because the past can be restored exactly as it was, but because it shapes how the present is lived. To remember Jerusalem is to remember purpose. Rituals emerge that hold this memory gently but firmly. Prayers include words of longing. Meals recall what was lost. Certain days are marked not with celebration, but with reflection. These moments do not interrupt life. They are woven into it, quiet pauses that allow grief and hope to coexist. The trauma of the siege and destruction also reshapes values. Suffering becomes a lens through which meaning is examined more carefully. Questions of justice, endurance, and faith take on new depth. Communities speak more openly about resilience, about what it means to remain human when the world feels hostile. There is no single way this trauma is carried. Some turn inward, finding strength in study and discipline. Others emphasize compassion, determined that suffering should not harden the heart. Differences arise, but they are held within a shared understanding of what has been endured. Jerusalem becomes both a physical memory and a symbolic one. It represents not only a city lost, but a reminder of vulnerability and perseverance. It teaches that even sacred centers can fall, and that meaning must be able to survive without them. This realization shapes how faith is taught. Belief is no longer presented as dependent on protection or permanence. Instead, it is framed as something that must endure uncertainty. Children are taught not only what to remember, but how to live with absence. Longing becomes a quiet companion. It does not always demand resolution. Sometimes it simply exists, acknowledged but not rushed. The idea of return remains present, though undefined. It is spoken of carefully, without certainty, without timetable. In this way, hope transforms. It becomes less about immediate restoration and more about continuity. The belief grows that survival itself carries meaning, that preserving identity across generations is a form of faithfulness. Rome continues to rise and fall in its own cycles, largely unaware of how deeply Jerusalem's memory continues to shape lives far from its ruins. Empires measure time in decades and reigns. Memory moves differently, stretching across centuries. I imagine a quiet evening in a distant land. A family gathers at a simple table. The meal is modest. Conversation drifts toward stories of ancestors, of journeys taken long ago. A child asks a question about Jerusalem. An elder answers slowly, choosing words with care. In that moment, the city lives again, not in stone, but in shared attention. This transmission of memory becomes an act of resistance, though it is rarely framed that way. To remember deliberately is to refuse erasure. To teach longing is to affirm that loss has not ended meaning. As Part 14 draws to a close, the trauma of destruction no longer dominates daily life, yet it remains present, shaping values, rituals, and hopes. The past is not a burden carried alone. It is a shared inheritance, tended gently, passed forward with intention. The night deepens now across many lands. Lamps flicker. Voices soften. Let us pause here together, breathing quietly in this reflective stillness. In the next part, we will explore how these memories and longings begin to influence new interpretations of law, ethics, and community, guiding how life is lived in an uncertain world far from its original center. Part 15. Let us move softly into Part 15, as though the night is calm and thoughtful, and the world feels wide rather than threatening. I remain here as background historian, listening now to the quieter work of interpretation and meaning-making that unfolds within scattered communities over time. As life in exile continues, the absence of Jerusalem does more than inspire memory. It reshapes how law, ethics, and responsibility are understood. Without a central authority or sacred place, communities turn inward, asking how to live faithfully wherever they are found. Law becomes portable, not rigid but adaptable. It is no longer something enacted primarily through sacrifice or place, but through daily behavior, choices, and relationships. How one treats a neighbor. How disputes are resolved. How rest is honored. These become the visible expressions of faith. Study deepens as a result. Texts are read slowly, carefully, with attention not only to instruction but to intention. Interpretation becomes communal, shaped by discussion rather than decree. Questions are welcomed. Debate is valued. Meaning is not fixed but explored, refined through shared thought. This process brings new emphasis to ethics. Without a temple to gather around, behavior itself becomes a form of worship. Acts of kindness, fairness, and restraint take on sacred weight. To live justly becomes a way of honoring what was lost and preserving what remains. Communities develop structures to support this way of life. Elders and teachers guide discussion. Gatherings are organized not only for prayer, but for learning and mutual care. Responsibility is shared. No one individual stands above the community. Authority is earned through wisdom and service rather than position. These shifts do not happen overnight. They unfold gradually, shaped by necessity and reflection. Old habits linger. New practices emerge slowly. The process is uneven, marked by moments of uncertainty and clarity alike. Children grow up within this evolving framework. They learn not only what to do, but why it matters. Questions are encouraged. Curiosity is seen as strength rather than threat. Identity becomes something practiced rather than inherited passively. This emphasis on teaching creates continuity across distance. Communities separated by geography remain connected through shared texts, shared questions, shared rhythms of life. Letters travel. Visitors bring news and interpretation. A sense of belonging stretches across borders. Rome remains present as the governing power, but its role in daily spiritual life diminishes. The empire can regulate behavior, but it cannot shape conscience. In this space between compliance and belief, communities find a measure of freedom. Adaptation becomes a guiding skill. Customs are adjusted where necessary, preserved where essential. The ability to distinguish between the two becomes a mark of wisdom. Survival depends not on rigidity, but on discernment. I imagine a gathering in a modest room, shelves lined with scrolls or copies made carefully by hand. People sit in a circle, discussing a passage. Voices overlap gently. No one raises their voice. The focus is not on winning an argument, but on understanding together. These conversations shape lives in practical ways. How to conduct business fairly. How to care for the vulnerable. How to maintain dignity under foreign rule. Law becomes a living guide rather than a distant ideal. Memory of Jerusalem continues to inform these discussions, not as a command to restore the past exactly, but as a reminder of what is at stake. The loss of the city teaches that institutions can fall, but values must endure. As Part 15 draws to a close, the transformation is clear. What began as survival has become structure. What began as loss has become depth. Faith has shifted from place to practice, from monument to meaning. The night around us feels settled, thoughtful. Voices fade. Lamps are dimmed. Let us pause here together, breathing quietly in this calm. In the next part, we will explore how these evolving interpretations begin to shape long-term identity, influencing how communities see themselves across generations, and how the idea of peoplehood continues even without land or power. Part 16. Let us drift gently into Part 16, as though the night has grown familiar and steady, no longer heavy with crisis but shaped by quiet continuity. I remain here as background historian, observing how identity settles and endures across generations, even as distance from Jerusalem grows longer. As years turn into decades, and decades into lifetimes, exile becomes the only reality many have ever known. Children are born in distant lands, learning the streets and sounds of places far from Judea as their first landscape. For them, Jerusalem is not a memory, but a story. Yet it is a story told with such care and consistency that it feels almost tangible. Identity, in this context, becomes something consciously cultivated. It is no longer reinforced by geography or political power. Instead, it is sustained through education, ritual, and shared responsibility. To belong is not simply to be born into a place, but to participate in a way of life. Families take on a central role in this process. Homes become the primary spaces of transmission. Stories are told at the table. Customs are practiced in daily routines. Questions are encouraged, answered patiently, revisited often. Through repetition and care, identity becomes woven into ordinary life. Community institutions grow more defined as well. Gathering places serve multiple purposes. They are spaces for prayer, learning, discussion, and mutual support. They anchor people socially and spiritually, offering structure in environments that may otherwise feel uncertain. This shared structure fosters a strong sense of peoplehood. Even without land or sovereignty, there is a clear understanding of belonging to something larger than oneself. This belonging crosses borders. A person traveling from one region to another can find familiarity through shared practices and rhythms, even when language or custom differs slightly. Differences do emerge, shaped by local cultures and circumstances. Some communities emphasize study. Others focus more on ritual or ethical action. These variations are not seen as fractures, but as expressions of adaptability. Unity does not require uniformity. It requires shared commitment. Memory of Jerusalem continues to play a quiet but persistent role. It is present in prayer, in teaching, in symbolic gestures. Yet it no longer dominates daily thought as an immediate loss. Instead, it serves as a compass, orienting values and long-term hope rather than dictating constant mourning. This balance allows communities to thrive without forgetting. Life is not suspended in grief. Joy is allowed. Celebration continues. Weddings are held. Children grow. Work is done. The past informs life without freezing it. Rome, and later other powers, continue to rule over these communities. Laws must be navigated. Taxes are paid. Public life requires caution and awareness. Yet beneath these external structures, an internal autonomy remains strong. Conscience and practice are shaped from within, not imposed from above. This internal strength proves essential during times of pressure. Periods of tolerance alternate with moments of restriction or hostility. Each shift tests resilience. Yet the foundations laid through education, community, and adaptability allow identity to endure without hardening into isolation. Belonging becomes defined less by opposition and more by continuity. The goal is not to resist the surrounding world at every turn, but to live meaningfully within it while remaining anchored to core values. This approach allows survival without erasure. I imagine a young person coming of age in such a community. They know the customs well. They have heard the stories many times. Yet they also move comfortably through the wider world, navigating multiple identities with care. Their sense of self is layered, not conflicted. This layered identity becomes one of the most enduring outcomes of exile. The ability to live among others without dissolving into them, to adapt without disappearing, shapes generations. It becomes a quiet strength, passed down through example rather than instruction alone. The idea of peoplehood evolves alongside this reality. It is no longer tied to borders or armies. It is defined by shared memory, law, and responsibility. This understanding allows continuity even when circumstances change drastically. As centuries pass, the loss of Jerusalem remains significant, but it no longer threatens survival. The community has learned how to carry loss without being consumed by it. Meaning has been redistributed, embedded into daily life and long-term vision. As Part 16 draws to a close, the picture before us is one of steady endurance. Not dramatic, not triumphant, but deeply resilient. A people shaped by displacement have learned how to remain whole without a center. The night feels calm now, settled. Lamps burn steadily. Voices are low and familiar. Let us pause here together, breathing softly in this sense of continuity. In the next part, we will explore how these enduring identities interact with changing political and cultural worlds, and how memory and adaptation continue to guide survival through new eras of challenge and transformation. Part 17. Let us move quietly into Part 17, as though the night has grown wide and spacious, filled not with urgency but with long perspective. I remain here as background historian, watching as centuries begin to turn and the world around these communities continues to change, again and again. Empires rise and shift, often without warning. Borders move. Rulers change. Laws are rewritten. For those living in diaspora, political life becomes something carefully navigated rather than fully embraced. Power is understood as temporary. What matters most is what can endure beneath it. Jewish communities find themselves living under many authorities over time. Some rule with tolerance, allowing autonomy in religious and communal life. Others impose restrictions, taxes, or limitations that make daily life more fragile. Each new regime brings uncertainty, yet also familiarity. Adaptation has become a practiced skill. Interaction with surrounding cultures deepens. Languages shift. Clothing styles change. Local customs are observed where possible. At the same time, boundaries are maintained with care. Certain practices remain non-negotiable, preserved not out of defiance, but out of understanding of their importance. This balance requires constant attention. Too much separation risks isolation. Too much assimilation risks disappearance. Communities navigate this tension thoughtfully, adjusting as circumstances require. The ability to choose what to adopt and what to preserve becomes an art refined over generations. Trade, scholarship, and professional life offer avenues for engagement with the wider world. Many become merchants, artisans, teachers, physicians. These roles provide stability and connection, allowing communities to sustain themselves economically while remaining distinct culturally. Learning continues to be a bridge. Texts are studied not only within the community, but sometimes shared with others. Ideas travel across boundaries. Dialogue, when possible, enriches understanding on all sides. Even under restriction, intellectual life remains active and adaptive. At the same time, memory of vulnerability never fully fades. Stories of Jerusalem's fall, of exile, of survival under pressure remain part of collective consciousness. They serve as reminders that conditions can change quickly, and that preparation matters. This awareness shapes communal values. Mutual aid remains strong. Care for the vulnerable is emphasized. Education is prioritized, seen as both protection and inheritance. Knowledge becomes something that cannot easily be taken away. Children are taught how to live in two worlds. They learn the customs of their community and the expectations of the society around them. They are taught caution without fear, confidence without arrogance. This dual awareness becomes second nature. Hope continues, though it evolves. It is no longer centered on immediate restoration or political power. Instead, it focuses on continuity, dignity, and moral purpose. The idea of return remains present, but it rests gently, without urgency. Jerusalem remains a symbol rather than a destination. It represents unity, memory, and aspiration, even as daily life unfolds elsewhere. Its presence in prayer and teaching offers orientation rather than demand. I imagine a scholar working by lamplight in a distant city. Outside, unfamiliar voices and sounds drift through the night. Inside, the scholar studies a text copied many times over, connecting past and present through careful attention. In that quiet act, centuries touch. As political landscapes continue to shift, this inner continuity proves essential. When tolerance wanes, communities draw inward, relying on established structures. When openness returns, they engage again, bringing with them a strong sense of self shaped by experience. Rome itself fades, transformed and replaced by other powers. Yet the patterns learned under empire remain relevant. The understanding that authority is temporary, and that identity must be carried internally, continues to guide survival. As Part 17 draws to a close, the scene before us is one of movement without disintegration. The world changes. Communities adjust. Memory holds steady. Identity remains flexible but intact. The night feels long and gentle now, stretched across generations rather than hours. Voices soften. Lamps burn quietly. Let us pause here together, breathing slowly in this expansive calm. In the next part, we will explore how remembrance of expulsion and exile becomes formalized into collective memory, shaping how history itself is told, commemorated, and understood across time. Part 18. Let us move gently into Part 18, as though time itself has slowed into something reflective and careful. I remain here as background historian, listening now to how memory becomes shaped, named, and carried forward deliberately, not only through stories, but through ritual remembrance. As generations pass, the expulsion from Judea and the destruction of Jerusalem no longer live only in personal memory. They become part of collective history, shaped into forms that can be shared reliably across time. What was once witnessed becomes taught. What was once endured becomes commemorated. Communities begin to mark the loss intentionally. Certain days are set aside for remembrance, not to reopen wounds, but to ensure they are not forgotten. These moments are quiet, solemn, and structured. They create space for grief that does not overwhelm daily life, but instead grounds it. Fasting, reflection, and restrained ritual become tools of memory. They allow people to feel the weight of the past without being consumed by it. Sorrow is acknowledged, given form, and then gently released back into the flow of life. In this way, remembrance becomes sustainable. Stories of Jerusalem's fall are told with care. Not every detail is repeated. Not every horror is described. What matters most is meaning. The emphasis shifts from recounting destruction to understanding its consequences. Why did this happen? What was lost? What endured? Through this process, history becomes moral instruction as much as record. The past is not treated as distant or irrelevant. It is presented as guidance, offering insight into power, vulnerability, faith, and responsibility. Memory becomes a teacher. This shaping of history also protects against distortion. By preserving a shared narrative, communities resist the temptation to forget inconvenient truths or reshape events to fit comfort. Loss is named honestly. Survival is acknowledged without denial of cost. Children learn these histories gradually. They are not burdened too early, nor shielded entirely. Stories are introduced gently, layered with context and meaning as understanding grows. In this way, remembrance becomes part of maturation rather than trauma. Language plays an important role here. Specific words and phrases become associated with loss and endurance. They carry emotional weight, connecting individuals to a shared past even when details differ. Through repetition, these words anchor memory securely. Commemoration also creates connection across distance. Communities separated by geography observe the same moments of remembrance. At the same time of year, similar prayers are spoken, similar silence is held. This shared rhythm reinforces peoplehood beyond borders. Rome, and later powers, remain largely unaware of this internal continuity. Empires measure success in visible outcomes. They do not account for the quiet preservation of memory unfolding in homes and gathering places far from political centers. Yet it is precisely this remembrance that ensures identity endures. By naming loss rather than suppressing it, communities transform trauma into coherence. The past becomes integrated rather than haunting. I imagine a quiet gathering during one of these moments of remembrance. The room is simple. No decoration draws attention. Voices are low. A passage is read slowly. Silence follows, not empty, but full. In that silence, generations are present together. This collective memory also shapes how future suffering is understood. When hardship arises, it is not seen as isolated or meaningless. It is placed within a longer story of endurance. This perspective does not erase pain, but it offers context that steadies the heart. Over time, remembrance becomes both anchor and compass. It roots identity in shared history while guiding ethical choices forward. The past is honored without being allowed to dictate despair. As Part 18 draws to a close, memory has taken on form and rhythm. Loss is no longer only remembered privately. It is held collectively, carefully, with intention. The night feels reflective now, calm and steady. Lamps glow softly. Breath slow. Let us pause here together, resting in this shared stillness. In the next part, we will explore how these remembered histories influence hope and expectation, shaping visions of the future even as communities remain grounded in the present. Part 19. Let us move softly into Part 19, as though the night has opened into a wide, patient horizon. I remain here as background historian, listening now not to the echoes of loss alone, but to the quiet ways hope reshapes itself after devastation. Hope, after exile, no longer rushes forward. It slows. It becomes careful, deliberate, shaped by memory rather than urgency. The expectation of immediate restoration gives way to something steadier and more enduring. Hope learns how to live alongside uncertainty. In the generations following Jerusalem's fall, longing does not disappear. It settles into prayer, poetry, and teaching. Yet it is no longer framed as demand. It is framed as trust. The future is imagined not as a return to what once was, but as a continuation of meaning across time. This shift changes how people speak about what lies ahead. Rather than predicting dates or outcomes, communities focus on readiness. How to live well now. How to preserve dignity. How to pass forward values intact. The future becomes something prepared for rather than awaited anxiously. Visions of restoration remain present, but they are held gently. They function as orientation rather than pressure. They remind people that history is unfinished, without insisting on resolution within a single lifetime. This allows hope to sustain rather than exhaust. Teaching reflects this balance. Elders speak about patience, about faithfulness without visible reward. They emphasize continuity over certainty. Children learn that belonging does not depend on outcomes, but on participation in shared life and responsibility. Prayer, too, evolves. It continues to express longing, but it also affirms gratitude for survival, for community, for learning. The language of hope becomes quieter, less dramatic, but deeply rooted. It speaks of endurance as achievement. This kind of hope proves remarkably resilient. It does not collapse when circumstances worsen. It does not require constant reassurance. It draws strength from history, from the knowledge that survival has already occurred under unimaginable strain. Communities facing new challenges return to these lessons. When conditions grow harsh, hope does not flee. It adapts. When tolerance fades, inner strength holds. When opportunity appears, engagement resumes thoughtfully. Hope becomes a companion rather than a destination. Jerusalem remains present in these visions, but a symbol rather than timetable. It represents wholeness, justice, and peace, not a specific political arrangement. This symbolic power allows it to unify rather than divide, to inspire without constraining. I imagine a quiet moment at the end of a long day. A family gathers. The conversation turns briefly toward the future. No grand predictions are made. Instead, there is talk of teaching children well, of helping neighbors, of preserving what matters. In that modest conversation, hope lives. This forward-looking steadiness also influences how history is understood. The past is not seen as a series of failures or losses, but as a foundation of learning. Each generation adds its layer, contributing to a long arc of meaning rather than a single dramatic endpoint. Rome, long gone by now, serves as a reminder rather than a threat. Its power was vast, yet temporary. The communities it displaced remain. This contrast reinforces confidence in what truly endures. Hope, shaped by exile, becomes deeply human. It accepts limits. It honors memory. It invests in daily life. It trusts continuity over control. As Part 19 draws to a close, the future feels neither distant nor overwhelming. It feels open, shaped by countless small choices made with care. Identity remains intact. Meaning remains alive. The night around us feels expansive and calm. The air is cool. Lamps burn steadily. Let us pause here together, breathing slowly in this gentle confidence. In the final part, we will reflect on the long legacy of the Roman expulsion, gathering together loss, adaptation, memory, and endurance, and resting quietly in the understanding of what it means to survive history itself. Part 20. Let us move softly into Part 20, as though the night has reached its quietest hour and the world feels gently held. I remain here as background historian, gathering together the long threads we have followed, and resting with you in the meaning they form. The Roman expulsion of the Jews began as an act of imperial power. It was meant to end resistance, to erase a center, to impose finality. Cities were destroyed. Lives were scattered. A people were forced away from land that had shaped them for centuries. By every measure Rome understood, this was victory. And yet, as time unfolded, something else became clear. What was broken did not disappear. It transformed. The loss of Jerusalem and the Temple reshaped Jewish life in profound ways. Faith moved inward, becoming portable. Law became lived practice. Community replaced geography. Memory became a form of home. What could no longer be protected by walls was carried through teaching, ritual, and care. Exile forced a reckoning with impermanence. Sacred places fell. Institutions vanished. Power proved fragile. From this reckoning emerged a deeper understanding that identity must survive without certainty, without protection, without control. Meaning could no longer depend on what might be taken away. Across generations, this understanding settled into rhythm. Children learned stories of a city they had never seen. Elders taught values shaped by loss and endurance. Communities adapted again and again to changing political worlds, never static, never entirely secure, yet never dissolved. The expulsion became more than a historical event. It became a defining memory, one that shaped how suffering was understood and how hope was held. Loss was named honestly. Longing was preserved without urgency. Survival itself became a form of faithfulness. Rome faded, as all empires do. Its roads crumbled. Its authority fragmented. Its declarations of permanence dissolved into history. What it sought to erase continued quietly, patiently, across centuries and continents. This is the deeper legacy of the Roman expulsion. Not only dispersal, but endurance. Not only destruction, but adaptation. Not only grief, but continuity. To survive exile required more than resilience. It required imagination. The ability to re-envision community. The willingness to teach memory carefully. The courage to live fully without guarantees. These qualities shaped a people who learned how to exist beyond borders, beyond centers, beyond power. Standing at the end of this long journey, the story does not conclude with closure in the usual sense. There is no single resolution, no return to an earlier world. Instead, there is continuity. A living inheritance carried forward through daily life. I imagine a quiet evening now, somewhere far from Jerusalem. A lamp burns softly. A familiar prayer is spoken. A story is told one more time, not urgently, not mournfully, but steadily. In that moment, history rests. This is where we leave the story for tonight. Not at an ending, but at a pause. Not in silence, but in gentle understanding. Not in loss alone, but in survival shaped into meaning. Thank you for walking this long path with me. You have listened through destruction, exile, remembrance, and adaptation. You have rested in the slow unfolding of history as it becomes lived experience. Now, as the night settles fully around you, you may let these stories drift. Let the details soften. Let the weight lift gently. History has been carried far enough for now. You are safe to rest. Sleep may come quietly, when it is ready. As we come to the quiet close of tonight's series, let us slow our thoughts even further and allow the story to settle gently where it belongs. The long road we have walked together now grows still. The voices fade. The lamps dim. What remains is a soft understanding, resting comfortably in the background. We have moved through centuries without rushing. We stood in a city of stone and prayer. We listened as power pressed down and walls gave way. We followed footsteps into exile, across unfamiliar ground, into lives reshaped by memory and care. And through it all, we watched how identity learned to survive without force, without land, without certainty. This was never only a story of loss. It was a story of adaptation, of meaning carried quietly from one generation to the next, of faith that learned how to live inside people rather than buildings, of memory that refused to harden, choosing instead to become guidance. If any feeling lingers now, let it be steadiness. History, when told softly, reminds us that endurance is rarely loud. Survival is often quiet, repetitive, patient. It happens in teaching a child a story, in lighting a lamp at dusk, in choosing care over despair again and again, without spectacle. You do not need to hold every detail from tonight. You do not need to remember names, dates, or places. Let them drift if they wish. What matters is the rhythm beneath them. The sense that human life continues even when centers fall. That meaning adapts. That continuity can exist without certainty. As background historian, I thank you for sharing this time with me. You listened attentively. You moved slowly. You allowed the story to unfold without urgency. That, too, is a kind of respect for the past. Now there is nothing left to do. Let the night take over from here. Let your breathing soften. Let your thoughts loosen and wander without direction. If images from the story appear, allow them to fade like lamplight at dawn. If sleep comes, welcome it gently. If rest arrives before sleep, that is enough. History has spoken for tonight. You are free to rest now.